Well, Kevin, thanks a lot for joining us today. I appreciate you taking time out. I know you've been busy with Space Shuttle Discovery and joining us over here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I know you've had a bunch of reviews, and Discovery finished its flight about a year ago,
That's
actually,
right.
and now there's been a ton of work going on, even though the vehicle obviously is not flying anymore. And
Right.
I thought it'd be a great opportunity to kind of update folks on Discovery, what we kind of did to the vehicle, and to get it ready for ferry. And of course, you're the integration manager for the Space Shuttle Program's integration office, or the transition and retirement office,
hmm
and you're a perfect candidate to kind of give an overall overarching um, synopsis of what's been going on in the last year. And of course, we're getting ready to ferry Discovery 2 to the Air and Space Museum. So, but before we do that, I kind of wanted to set the stage with a little biographical information, because
hmm
you've been around for quite a while. And where'd you come from, and talk about how you got involved in NASA in the first place.
Well, actually grew up in the Houston area. One of the probably rare folks that work here that actually come from Houston. Um, Grew up always liking aircraft. Always thought I'd grow up to build aircraft. And so when I went to college, I studied aerospace engineering with that in mind. But found out about a co-op program here at
And
NASA.
you went to
Went to Texas
Texas
A&M.
A&M.
I'm a proud fighting Texas Aggie. Uh, have a degree in aerospace engineering. I co-opted here 3 tours and fell in love with the space business and everything, and was fortunate enough to get an offer and came to work here right out of college, and went into the engineering directorate. Thought that's what I would do, supporting programs like shuttle. But about mid-career, I had the opportunity to actually go and work on a vehicle, and that became my new passion. So since about 1999, I have been in the space shuttle program, primarily working on orbiter, and didn't think that I would be around long enough to actually help shut this program down. But that's what I do now, is transition and retirement, and trying to get things closed out.
Yeah, so that sets the stage, but of course, with Discovery kind of being the focus right now, but it's really all three of the orbiters, that
It's
the
actually,
operational
and
orbiters.
while Enterprise is not a full orbiter, it's actually 4 vehicles that we're trying to get ready to.
Correct. You've
hmm
made a bunch of trips, and we'll talk about that,
hmm
in a second or two. But um, kind of tell people exactly what you do, how you coordinate all this as the transition integration manager for the office.
Well, a little background. Everybody's aware that we stopped flying shuttle last summer, when we landed Atlantis in July. But that was really the beginning of a lot of activity for transition and retirement. And it's not as visible, obviously, as flight, but a lot of activity going on there. And it actually has quite a history. When the President Bush announced the end of the space shuttle program was going to be in 2010, he announced that in 2004. A lot of planning started. And without all of that teamwork and planning that had gone into place, because this is such a large program, and NASA's not in the mode of shutting down things like this very often, we had to do a lot of benchmarking, a lot of planning that led us up to where we are today. And so we're in an execution phase now, and the orbiters are the most visible pieces of property that we're going to transition, but there's actually over 1 million line items of property that we have to
A
do something with,
million.
over 1 million. So we're working with other programs within the agency. We're working with other agencies, and then we're also looking at trying to preserve artifacts and things for future educational purposes and things like that. So we're working with museums, universities, and things as well to work with all that property. A lot of records. We have tens of thousands of boxes of physical records by law. In some cases, we have to preserve, and others we are preserving for other programs. We also have a lot of electronic records, IT type things, many gigabytes, and I'm probably underestimating because I'm sure it's in the terabyte range. This program ranges over 30 years, and so the
Right.
technology has really
Right.
changed in that span. So we go from having actual drawings to a lot of CAD at the latter end of the program. So we're having to deal with all of that, and like I say, not real glamorous, not something people think about a lot, but in order to preserve a lot of that and handle that properly, that's what's going on in transition and retirement.
Based on what you just said, that leads to the question. I'm not sure that you can really give a true estimate, but how many people must be involved in this activity, because we're talking about people kind of in the background there, but there's operational people, there's the ground ops people. Can you even estimate the numbers of people that have been working on this since
It's
the orbiter's
now
retirement?
over the span, it's been hundreds, and the team has been larger because when we were operational, we were able to tap into more of those resources to do the planning, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to take advantage of a lot of the expertise while it was here to do the planning, and so the head count today is much smaller than it was under operations. It's in the hundreds that it's doing this, but it's still spread across the country because we have contractors
Right.
across the country. A lot of activity, obviously, done at the Kennedy Space Center where we're processing vehicles. But I would say it's less than 500 people today that are involved doing this sort of activity. Where at the peak we had 10,000 people or more
Right.
working shuttle. So you can see the scale there. It's a lot of work for those people though.
Well, you talked about the records and preserving all of that, but as we finished flying these vehicles, of course, Discovery ended its career first a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
this past Friday.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be all this hardware. How do you safe the vehicle and things like that? That an extensive amount of thought must have had to go into.
It did.
What we decided was prudent to protect for future
Mm-hmm.
use or study. And I know you've got some pictures that you're going to show a few representative items, but can you talk about the numbers of components? We can focus on Discovery, but it's pretty
Sure.
much all three vehicles,
Yeah.
right?
Kind of
That you
set
had
the
to
stage
work
for
on.
that. You're exactly right. The program is really good at processing for flight. We really knew how to do that. And when you sit down and you look at a spacecraft that's flown 30 or 40 times, some has some systems on board that are toxic that NASA knows how to handle in our facilities and that. But when you start thinking in terms of I'm going to put this in a museum, I want the public to get up close and really experience this. You had to think differently about this. And our orbiter project office and vehicle processing offices had to sit down and almost with a clean sheet and look at this vehicle and say, what do I do to safe the vehicle to make it safe enough for public display? And in some cases that required systems to be removed completely. Others it just required a good purge and cleaning, and so that was really the start of how we did this. And we did come up with some requirements documents that the we could write procedures towards to actually go and process that vehicle just for that. On top of that, the agency looked at this and said, we have some valuable assets here. In some cases, some components that have been through some things that we've never put hardware through. We should retain that. We should look at that and learn from that. And so a list of hardware was put together that we wanted to remove from the vehicles for that purpose, for either knowledge or actually even for future use. We've got the Space Launch System has approached us and requested some main propulsion hardware that we have removed from some of the orbiters for reuse, actually.
Right.
So it'll fly on.
Now, I know you've got a couple of pictures. You
Mm-hmm.
may want to show a couple of pictures,
Sure.
just a representative of kind of what you're talking about there.
Yes, we'll call it the first picture.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's up there now.
So we have a liquid hydrogen pre-valve here. This is part of the main propulsion system in the orbiters, and the Space Launch System actually requested that to be retained. Another major component that's being retained for Space Launch System is the Space Shuttle main engine. So some of the components that go along with that system were pulled out of the aft end of the orbiters to go along with the engines for use on the Space Launch System.
Right. Now, when you remove that pre-valve, of course you had to fill that gap, and
Right.
I think that was the next
So
photo.
picture number 2 shows a spool that was designed to be put in place so that everything was structurally sound, so the vehicle was still ferry worthy because this vehicle's never flown without that pre-valve installed.
Right.
So you can see this is a little bit of the same sort of mode that we were in, sustaining engineering, that type of thing was still in place even under transition or retirement. Things like this had to go on in order to keep the vehicles ferry worthy.
Now, one of the other major components that the programs decided to retain, and mainly I guess for SLS, the Space Launch System, is the 14 or 15
we had
shuttle main engines.
14 flight engines at the end of the program that were retained for Space Launch System.
In order to replace those, we had to come up with a ingenious kind of design, I guess, and that's the replica Space Shuttle main engine.
Right.
And that's what you see there. Right?
The next picture, the third picture here, is actually what we call the RSME. We have to have our acronyms around here in order to survive at NASA. And that was really kind of an ingenious way to look at it. You take an orbiter, and everybody recognizes the nozzles on the back end for the shuttle main engines. If we're retaining the engines, we didn't think it looked right without it, and we were able to find old nozzles that had been used for engineering tests, different things, and do a little bit of work to them, fix them up, and actually had to come up with um, an adapter to install where the power head would have been on this engine so that we could install it on the aft end of the vehicle so it looks like main engines are there. So you get an RSME, and it's very rare that we went through all the certifications and everything. So you see a picture there, and that actually shows the RSME at the end of the line, and you see 3 shuttle main engines behind it. You can see the difference on the top. The public will never see that because that's in the aft end of the vehicle, so the nozzle will be exposed, and it'll look like it has 3 main engines on board.
Right. Now let's see. Then you go on to your next image, and that is the attach point inside
Right.
what you just mentioned that the public won't see, but there are some
That's
specific
exactly right.
items in there, I think, that were part of the transition
Right.
process, correct?
We've always, when we ferried the vehicles, we had ferry struts. We always had to put in there to lock things in place. We don't want pieces moving around and vibrating. And so, but if you look in that picture, you can actually see that adapter. Normally the power head would have been in there, would have looked a lot more complex with all the plumbing. And here you just see the adapter in the middle of those ferry struts in there.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there's the next one with the.
Right. Another picture similar to that one there.
Right.
A little bit
right,
clearer picture
correct.
of what you're looking at.
Yeah. We're talking with Kevin Templin. He's the integration manager for the Space Shuttle Program's Transition and Retirement Office, and we'll come back and continue our talk and discussion with Kevin in just a second.